Well, good evening. Good to see some familiar faces back and some new ones as well. Well, we're going to dive right in here and continue on from what we were discussing here this morning, but I guess because there might be some new people here, really if you've never been to a Creation Ministries presentation before, you might be wondering, why are we talking about things like evolution? Why are we discussing science? Why are we discussing these things? I mean, this is church, right? We're supposed to talk about the Lord. We're supposed to talk about Jesus, saving grace, these types of things. Well, the reason not my ministry, the reason the ministry that I speak for does what we do is because there's been a slow and steady degradation of the perceived authority of the Word of God. See, God's Word has ultimate authority. It doesn't matter whether you hold it in authority or not. God's Word is the authority. Okay? But the perception of many people in our culture right now is that, you know what, hey, science has disproven things in the Bible. You can't take the Bible as plainly read, etc., etc. You'll hear this, repeated oftentimes on TV shows, talk shows, all this kind of thing. And so, as a Christian apologetics ministry, what we want to do as a ministry is uphold the authority of the Word of God. And to show Christians that you don't have to take compromised positions on God's Word. You can trust it from the very first verse all the way through. Okay, so that's what we're here to do. Not just argue about science and stuff like that. What we do is we show that you can trust God's Word, and what science is showing actually supports the Bible. Okay? Now, before we get into the more scientific end of it here this evening, I always like to remind people of, why we do what we do and so on. In a very practical way, one of the reasons that I first got on board with this ministry is because I noticed the impact the topic of evolution was having on the Christian church, especially with our youth. Okay? And I mentioned that this morning in the presentation that many Christian leaders have known for a long time that we're losing our youth at a rapid rate. George Barna says now that 70% of young people from a Christian home that go to a public school, we lose them by age 18. And so you'll see quotes like this. This quote was taken from a talk by T.C. Pickney. He's one of the heads of the Southern Baptist movement in the United States, huge denomination. And he's pleading with his fellow pastors. There are hundreds of pastors in front of him when he said this quote, and he said, "We're losing our kids. Research indicates 70% of teens who are involved in a church youth group will stop attending church within 2 years of their high school graduation." Think about that statement. Here you have a leader of leaders in the church pleading with his fellow pastors, guys, we got to do something. But the problem is, if you don't know why it's happening, you can't fix it, right? I mean, there's a lot of people out there, folks, talking about all sorts of wacky things we should do in church nowadays, I mean, we got to be more relevant, right? We got to be cool. Maybe we should have the pastor come in on a zip line on a Sunday morning, and have some smoke bombs going off, and then the people will just come to the church, right? I don't think so. I think when people come to church, they want to come to church. And if they're not coming, they don't want to be here. This is the house of the Lord, right? See, what I find is if you really want to know what the objections to the Christian faith are, there's a very simple thing you can do, and that's to go out there and share your faith. Let's say within the next 3 months you just share your faith, let's say 100 times, share the gospel. See, most Christians don't share the gospel 100 times in their whole life, let alone 3 months. But you could do it, right? You could just go out and just talk to people. And when you do, you're going to notice certain objections they have. So what I'm going to do is quote now a man who is an evangelist. His name is Mark Cahill. Some of you may have read his book, The One Thing You Can't Do in Heaven. You know what that is, right? Share the gospel. By the time you're there, you're either in or out, right? So anyway, this man is a professional evangelist, and he goes around and talks with people. And this is what he said in a personal letter to our ministry. "I'm an evangelist. I go around and talk with people, one-on-one conversations. My time on college campuses and talking to high schoolers, the number one answer that I get for there not being a God so they don't have to believe in it is evolution." You guys are familiar with the theory of evolution. For those of you who weren't here this morning, that billions of years ago, someone, non-living chemicals just come together and they form some kind of life form, and then it turns into something like bacteria, and then it's kind of like a worm, and then it turns into politicians, and here we are, right? Sorry, I skipped lawyers along the way. I just forgot the evolution. No, I'm just joking. You guys know the deal, right? That's what they're teaching as fact in our public schools. Is that not right? He goes on and says this. I had a church friend go off to college. We were talking one day. He told me I didn't have to share with him about God anymore. He'd taken some science classes at the University of Georgia, and that evolution was laid out so perfectly in that book that there is no God. See, as I mentioned this morning, I grew up as an atheist. I grew up believing in evolution as fact. I know exactly where his friend's coming from. You walk up to somebody who believes in the theory of evolution, you start talking to them about God, they're looking at you like, why do you need God? I can explain everything without God. I can explain all of existence without a creator because everything just creates itself. That's what's in their mind. He said, I think the real issue is that people know that evolution is true. They would know that the Bible would not be true, and then that leads to the conclusion of atheism. And again, I can understand him because as I mentioned this morning, I've read the scriptures over and over and over, and I continue to do so. And you know the only thing I've never found in the Bible? Evolution. And you would think if that was the overarching way that God had created the universe, he might have mentioned it once in the scriptures, right? But it's never there. It's always God creating. Ex nihilo, right? Now, those quotes that I gave you were from Christians, okay? What about the other team? What about the atheists? What do they think about this concept of evolution? Well, let me give you a quote from an atheist. This quote is from a man named Frank Zindler, who is an atheist. And this quote was taken from a debate when Frank was in a debate with a Christian on the existence of God. And here's what the atheist had to say about this topic. He said, the most devastating thing that biology did to Christianity was the discovery of biological evolution. Now that we know that Adam and Eve never were real people, the central myth of Christianity is destroyed. If there never was an Adam and Eve, there never was an original sin. If there never was an original sin, then there's no need of salvation. If there's no need of salvation, then there's no need of a Savior. And I submit that puts Jesus, historical or otherwise, into the ranks of the unemployed. Now that's blasphemous, but it's entirely logical. That is total logic right there. No Adam and Eve, no original sin. Why do you need a Savior? Do you see how the atheist is arguing here? Very logical. Now, if you've come to the position as a Christian and you say, well, yeah, but maybe God used evolution. You know, you really don't do that well if the person you're talking to is well informed. For example, I mentioned Richard Dawkins in my morning talk this morning, obviously. And he's the most famous atheist on the planet. So when people come up to Richard Dawkins and they say, oh yeah, but maybe Genesis is just symbolic. This is what he says to them. Oh, but of course the story of Adam and Eve was only symbolic, wasn't it? Symbolic? Jesus had himself tortured and executed for a symbolic sin by a non-existent individual. Nobody not brought up in the faith could reach any verdict other than barking mad. See this whole, oh yeah, maybe God used evolution thing? It's not working with the atheists. They just mow you down because it just doesn't make sense. It doesn't support what the scripture says. Now, this morning we gave some definitions of science and, you know, the difference between repeatable, observable science and then the historical type science, which is where the creation evolution issue lies, right? I mean, we are observing things in the present today, but then we make guesses about what happened, why they're there, etc., etc. You know, as I mentioned, you can't prove that Abraham Lincoln lived in the same way that you can prove the boiling point of water at sea level, right? Two different types of science. And let me illustrate that for you guys. I'm going to show you my favorite fact, okay? There it is. Pretty cool fact, isn't it? Now, here's the point. I want to ask you guys, what's missing? What was it originally? Now, you don't know, so I'm going to give you a hand here, okay? We've got some options. Was it A? Was it B? Was it C? Or was it D? How many people want to go for A? Nobody? Okay, how many for B? Come on, you got to play along. No? How many for C? Oh, all the optimists. How many for D? Okay, well, let me tell you what it was. That's what it was originally. There's nothing missing. Why did you guys think there was something missing? No, I actually told you something was missing, if you don't remember. See, I gave you a fact, and then I gave you a way to interpret the fact. I said, here's the fact. Now guess what? Something's missing. And I gave you a way to interpret the fact, which, by the way, nobody questioned. Right? And then you gave me some logical answers. They were just all wrong. They might have been logical, but they were wrong. See, when you get shown facts, you get shown interpretations of facts, and this is what is happening to our young people in schools. Right? Look at this dead thing in a rock layer. Yeah, we're looking at it. That's the fact. And it lived 70 million years ago. Whoa, 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 whoa. Where'd you pull that into your head? Did you ever observe those 70 million years? No. That's all, right, based on your model of history, etc. Now, what I want to do here is define evolution. You know, we hear this word used so many different ways, right? But biologically, I mean, Frank Zindler, the atheist, said that biological evolution, that was the death knell of Christianity. No Adam and Eve, etc. Well, you look in a textbook today, you often see words or definitions like this, I should say. Changes in gene frequencies and expression in a population over time. That's the definition of evolution you'll find in a lot of textbooks. Well, folks, if that's the definition of evolution, I'm an evolutionist. And I'm not. So, see, I know there's changes in gene frequencies and gene pools, et cetera, over time. But that's not what people think of when they think of evolution, right? They're thinking of pond scum to people over millions of years. So, not to misrepresent an evolutionist, here is an evolutionist, Kirkut, and he defined the general theory of evolution this way. It's the theory that all the living forms in the world have arisen from a single source, which itself came from an inorganic form. Here's what's going on in this person's head and what is taught as fact in public school. That billions of years ago, there was no life on the planet. And then first life just somehow came together. And then that first life form changed and became all the living things that have ever been, including me and you. That's what they think. And that's what they teach. And if that's true, then now we can define evolution a little tighter for the purpose of my talk here tonight. See, if evolution is true, it would have to be a natural process that can create life from non-life. There's no outside intelligence if you're an atheist, by the way. You don't think there's any intelligent designer or creator or anything like that. Evolution would also have to be a process where matter or energy constantly creates new genetic information. It has to be creative, folks. Now, this is the main part of my talk tonight. It has to be a process that can create new genetic information. Let me explain this. Just tune into this part, it's important. See, if evolution is true, that millions of years ago there was no life and then the first life form just spontaneously generates, okay? That first life form must have been very simple. It couldn't have been too complex or it couldn't have come together by chance. So let's say this first life form is some kind of amoeba or something like that. It's very simple, we'll say. Well, we know today that all living things, of course, have a coded library of information that codes for that creature, and it's contained within its DNA. DNA is a coding system, right? They call it the language of life. All living things have DNA. So we're going to say that this library of information that would code for something that simple, it must be a very small library of information. So in my analogy here, I've only got a few books, right? And those few books would contain information for, let's say, an outer layer to prevent this thing from falling to pieces. It would have information for extracting energy from the environment through some kind of power plant. It would have genetic information for a blueprint of instructions it could pass on to the next generation, and it would have some kind of decoding device. We would say that it has a very small library of genetic information. But if you were to turn that amoeba into, say, something like a horse, over billions and billions of years, what do you have to do to the library of information of an amoeba to turn it into a horse? Well, you've got to write out a whole bunch of new books of information that's just never existed before. I'm talking reams of new information that you've got to write out to code for all the things that are in a horse that aren't in an amoeba. Because amoebas don't have blood. They don't have blood clotting systems. They don't have brains. They don't have eyes. They don't have eyelashes. They don't have skin. They don't have muscles. They don't have bones. They don't have any of that. So see, the real question for the evolutionists is this. Where does all that genetic information come from? It wasn't there before. Now it's here. What's writing out all this new information for these new forms, functions, and features on creatures that wasn't there in the past? Here's another way to think about it. when I was in school, I would get taught things like this. They would say, well, Cal, see, at one time there were things like reptiles, and reptiles evolved and changed slowly and turned into things like birds. They'd show me all sorts of diagrams, etc. And see, the theory of evolution postulates this. It says that creatures, when they produce offspring, their offspring have changes, small changes. And if these small changes provide a survival advantage to the creature, those small changes get retained in the population, and you take all these small changes and you build them up until you get big changes. So things like scales on lizards can turn into feathers on birds. Do you get the idea? Now, when we think about this kind of process, as I mentioned, you'd need to have all this new information, right? Let's think about a couple of things here. What does a bird have that a lizard doesn't, for example? I can mention a couple of things here. Birds have hollow bones. Lizards have solid bones. What rewrote all the genetic instructions for light bones? Flight navigation systems. You know, you ever see a flock of birds wheeling around and they don't bump into each other, and you're like, how do they do that? Some birds can migrate for thousands of kilometers, right? You see, that's not even a physical construct. You can't cut a bird's brain open and say, oh, I'm taking its flight navigation gland out. Right? It's like a computer program that's in the brain of a bird that's not in the brain of a lizard. Where did all those that programming come from? Of course, the method of locomotion is completely different, right? Lizards crawl, right? And birds fly. What changed the musculature? What changed the bones, the diagrams, all those types of things? What gave birds preening glands? Lizards don't have them. How did the scales change into feathers, etc.? One more thing. The breathing apparatus. See, lizards pant like we do. It's kind of like, right? Well, birds don't do that. Birds are phenomenal. As birds' lungs are doing this, right? It's going, it's like this jet system that just circulates through. It's phenomenal. It's one of the reasons birds can fly and we can't, right? So, question, what's writing out all this brand new genetic information? And by the way, what does this creature look like halfway in between the process? You know, when you're not really a lizard and you're not really a bird, you're kind of like a libbard. What do you look like? And why is it better than just being a lizard? Because lizards seem to survive just, well, fine. I mean, let's think about it. How are you moving halfway in between this transition? You know, you're crawling along here and then you're flapping like a bird. What are you doing in between? Like, you doing some new cool disco move or something? How are you breathing? How do you go halfway between and like, how's that working out for you? Is it like a Lamaze class or something? You know? Like, what are we doing? See, when I was in school, let me tell you, just be honest with you, I wasn't the academic type. Just give me the answer. Yeah, whatever. Okay, yeah. And I'll just write it down because I just want to go play. But all those ideas went into my head and built up. And oh yeah, things just change. They change all the time. Evolution's a fact. See, most people come to believe in the theory of evolution is why they believe in it, because they're taught by authority figures. We're all taught by authority figures, people who have expertise that we do not have, correct? So if you don't know how to play piano, guess what? You're going to go find somebody who plays piano, right? Now, we are inundated with this concept of evolution everywhere. It's on TV, it's on movies, it's on magazines, it's everywhere, right? For example, you go to a museum. Here's the exhibit from the Natural History Museum in England, in the UK. Here's their idol to Darwin there, set up in their evolution exhibit. And you walk in and you start reading these informational plaques, when they at a museum. And look at the way the information is doled out to the kids. I mean, thousands and thousands and thousands of kids will come to this museum every year, and this is what they learn. Darwin's work supported the view that all living things have developed into the forms we see today by a process of gradual change over very long periods of time. This is what is meant by evolution. You'll notice they didn't stress what type of change it would have to be, and I want to remind you, what type of change do we need to see to have evolution true? It's the type of change that adds genetic information to turn one thing into another, right? But they just said change. And then at the end they say, well, many people find that the theory of evolution does not conflict with their religious beliefs. See what they're trying to do here? They're trying to convince you, well, you can have your religion, and you can believe God just used evolution. Well, see, this is a true statement. Many people around the world find that the theory of evolution does not conflict with their religious beliefs. I mean, if you've got a friend who's a Hindu or something like that, or maybe a New Ager, and you're driving along and you see a bunch of cows out in the field, and they're like, hey, one of them might be my great-grandmother, regurgitated 17 times from a past life. They don't have a problem with the theory of evolution, right? There's physical evolution, there's spiritual evolution. It works with their religion just fine. But if you're a Christian, you have massive theological problems trying to take evolution and your faith and stick it together. Let me highlight some of them for you. See, if evolution is true, then it was a process that requires death. It's a process that took place on this planet over billions of years. Billions of years of one creature struggling and morphing and turning into something else within, wiped out something else. Bloodshed on a massive scale. Disease, cancers, all these horrible processes to end up where you got higher life forms. It requires death on a scale that's just unimaginable. And if God used that process, then what you're saying is God used billions of years of death and cancer and pain and suffering. And at the very end, he called his creation very good. Which means cancer is very good? No. But, of course, if you want to follow that train of thought, you've got to say, okay, well, somehow this is very good. But then, of course, God shows up in the form of a man, Jesus. And Jesus goes around and does good things, right? We know what some of the good things that Jesus did. Remember the man with the crippled hand? He healed that. People that were blind, he caused them to see. People with leprosy, he cured that. He even brought people back to life from the dead. Now, how do we know that what Jesus did was good? Well, because what he fixed was bad, right? But if God used all those bad things to create, then showed up in the form of a man and fixed them and said, hey, you should worship me. Doesn't make a lot of sense, does it? I mean, if I sneak outside on the break and I fiddle with one of your cars and you go later on and you're like, row, row, and I'm like, hey, I could fix that for you. And you're like, oh, Cal, you're such a great guy. No, I was your problem in the first place. See, it doesn't make sense. Now, let's continue looking at the plaques here. It says, before Charles Darwin, most people believed that God created all living things in exactly the form that we see them today. This is the basis of the doctrine of creation. You got to love it when the opponent gets to define the terms, right? I mean, this is what lawyers do. They want to, define the terms and then you win the war. See, this is a false statement. And there's one word that makes this a false statement. It's the word exactly. Nowhere in the Bible does it say that God created the creatures in exactly the form that we see them today. It says 10 times in the Bible that God created kinds of creatures to reproduce after their own kind, which means dogs make dogs and people make people and horses make horses. And if you get an apple and you get the seed and you stick it in the ground, it's going to make a tree that's going to make apples after their own kind. It doesn't mean there's not going to be variation. Of course there's going to be variation. We know about Mendelian genetics and things like that. But that change isn't evolution. What evolution requires is information that changes one thing into a totally different thing. See, if you study evolution, you're going to hear a lot about the term natural selection. Now, natural selection was kind of touted by Darwin as this superpower that would somehow change one thing into another. Okay? What's interesting about natural selection, many times, see, every creationist I know on the planet believes in natural selection. You know why? Because we can observe it in real time. So many times skeptics are surprised when you guys believe in natural selection? Well, of course we do. There was actually a Christian, Edwin Blythe, who wrote a scientific paper on natural selection from a creationist standpoint 20 years before Darwin ever published Origin of Species. So when they say, wow, you guys believe in natural selection? We go, yeah, because we thought of it first. But can natural selection actually change a creature and make it morph from one thing into one kind of thing into another? We're going to take a look at that here, and let's see. Now, we're going to use a example that's very simple but accurate to show you why natural selection could not possibly evolve something. And for my example, I'm going to use dogs. Most people in Canada are familiar with dogs, okay? Whether you got a dog or you see one around or whatever. Now, I talked about the DNA of the creatures. What we're going to do is we're just going to focus in on one gene here, and that's going to be the gene for the length of the hair on these dogs to illustrate natural selection, okay? And what we're going to do is see in DNA, you inherit half your DNA from mom, half from dad. These dogs do the same. And so there's 2 bits of information at the same location in the DNA. And it depends on which one gets expressed as to what the creature is going to look like, whether you're going to have brown eyes or blue eyes or, these types of things, these genes. So in my example here, my capital letter L is going to symbolize genetic information for long hair, and the capital letter S is going to symbolize genetic information for short hair. Now, all we're going to do with our example here is talk about the length of the hair or the fur on these dogs to illustrate natural selection, okay? So, some genes work in conjunction with each other. So these guys here have medium length fur. Does everybody get this? Pretty simple stuff. Okay, if we let dogs do what dogs do, pretty soon we have more dogs, right? Now, they're going to inherit genetic information, just like your kids inherit genetic information. That's why you go around and you go, oh, look, she's got mommy's eyes and daddy's ears, and where'd that nose come from? And you're looking in the photo books, oh, it's great Aunt Fanny, Anyway, you guys know, right? You inherit genetic information through the family line. Anyway, okay, so this guy here inherits the short hair gene from mom. This guy inherits the short hair gene from dad. He's got short fur. This guy over here, it's kind of the opposite. Long hair gene from mom, long hair gene from dad. He's got long fur. And the guys in the middle are kind of, the same as mom and dad. Now, that's great. We've got a population of dogs now. Some have short hair, some have medium length fur, and some have long fur. Okay? Now, let's say this group of dogs moves up north, okay, where I was born. Let's say North Bay, Ontario. And it's summertime, so it's fine. But then we're going to introduce a selection factor, winter. What's going to happen to short-haired dogs in the winter? They're done. They don't have long enough fur. They're going to freeze to death, right? And they're not going to have kids, so they're not going to pass on their genetics. And the medium-length fur dogs, they're probably going to move out of that area as fast as they can. They're going to go running down south. But see, the dogs with the long hair, they're fine. They don't have a problem with it. As a matter of fact, they might even move up north because they like it, right? Because they got long fur. Well, pretty soon you're going to be left with only the dogs with long hair in that environment because they've adapted, right, to the cold. Now, what's going to happen, of course, to this population is they're going to pass on the genetic information that they have. So you can only, if their slots are filled up with that long hair gene, they can only pass those on, and pretty soon we got a whole bunch of dogs with long hair. By the way, if you study genetics, it's a little more complicated than this. You got jumping genes and dominant, recessive, and stuff like that. But the point remains the same. If the short-haired gene gets retained in this population and it gets expressed, as in a dog gets born with short hair in this population, it gets wiped out. And pretty soon, you've only got these genes left. For example, I had a lot blonder hair when I was younger and blue eyes, and Angela has blonde hair and blue eyes, because guess what our kids look like? Little cookie cutter, blonde hair. That's all we got. We don't have a lot of genetic, a big gene pool in our family, right? So it's the same thing that's going on here. Okay, this is easy to understand. Most people can understand this very, very simply. But let's take a look at what's happened in the process here. We started off with dogs with genetic information for long hair and short hair. We wiped out the dogs with genetic information for short hair, and we get left with dogs with genetic information for long hair. 2 questions. First question is very easy to answer because all you have to do is look at this picture, then look at this picture. Okay? Question, have the dogs changed? Look at this picture, look at that picture. Have the dogs changed? Yeah, you can see it. All sorts of different morphological changes you can see in creatures. Question number 2, have they evolved? No. Because the dogs at the bottom don't have more genetic information than the dogs at the top. They've actually got less. You know why? They don't even have the short-haired gene anymore. This is going in the wrong direction from what evolution needs to show. See, if the dogs at the bottom had wings or proboscis or bat sonar or something like that, they'd be evolving. because they'd have some new stuff that they never had before. But this is no help to the theory of evolution. This is going in the wrong direction. And yet natural selection is proof, this is the ultimate proof, it seems, for some people. Look, evolution has changed. Look, the dog's changed. Oh, that proves evolution. No. The creationist is sitting there going, excuse me, there's no new genetic information. Show me something new that never existed before. And that would be evolution. See, up until a year ago, if you walked into my house, that's who greeted you. His name was Caleb. He was a Great Pyrenees. He was about 180 pounds. Big guy. Not the cat, that's just a snack. Just kidding. I don't do that to cats. I think about it because I don't like cats, but anyway, I don't do it. So don't write into the ministry saying, that guy said he fed his cats to dogs. Now, this was my oldest daughter's dog, okay? And I've got 3 children. So my son had a dog. She was called Abby. And you can see she's kind of a medium-sized dog, kind of a shepherdy thing. But I've got 3 kids, so you guys know where this is going, right? My youngest daughter, I want my own dog. So I got this thing, And she called it Greg. What kind of dog name is Greg? But anyway, so that's what's looking up at me from the kitchen table, All excited and stuff. Now you can see, well, it's not natural selection. This is actually artificial selection, right? This is dog breeding. It's one of the oldest scientific experiments we've ever done. And I'm sure there's some farmers in the audience here and around here, and they can testify to the fact that you can breed animals and try to breed them for certain traits that they have, right? And see, if you want a dog that looked like Caleb, you can only mate that dog with another dog with those characteristics. And it's actually, we call them purebreds, but you should call them inbreds, right? I mean, you don't want to do that with people, do you? Right? But that's what you're actually doing, right? If you just let those dogs mate amongst themselves, they're just going to turn into this, mongrel type thing. But anyway, I've got 2 grandkids now, so I had to put one of them in my presentation. So just to show you the size of Caleb, too, that was my first granddaughter, Ellie. Now, some people even call that a dog. Some people call that a rat on a leash. But anyway, the point that the creationist is making is this. You can go all over the world and see all sorts of different wacky looking dogs. When we were in Australia last year, we saw the dingo. Kind of looked like my son's dog. Kind of like a shepherd, except different coloration. But look at the snout, right? Some dogs have big ears and some dogs have short ears, and they're tall and they're skinny and they're a lot of fur or not a lot of fur or whatever. But they're all the dog kind. So what the creationist is saying is this. God created creatures with a massive amount of genetic information. And you can divvy that genetic information up all sorts of different ways, but they're still dogs. You can even get him. I had to put Fluffy in my presentation because he just kind of looks cool. Actually, I came across the worst example of an inbred dog that I've ever seen in my life. So if you're kind of queasy, you might want to turn away on this one. But I just had to show it because it's just, I don't know, I've never seen an inbred dog like this before. Okay, that was pretty cheesy, but I had to put it in. Anyway, so the creationist is saying, look, God created all the creatures with a massive amount of information. You can divvy it up, but dogs stay dogs. And the evolutionist says, no, dogs change into different things over millions of years. And so what are they going to say about this to try to prove it? Well, interesting, when you go to their own literature. This is from Science Magazine in 2002. They're talking about the evidence for an East Asian origin of domestic dogs. And they said the origin of the domestic dog from wolves has been established. We examined the mitochondrial DNA sequence variation among 654 domestic dogs, representing all major dog populations worldwide, suggesting a common origin from a single gene pool for all dog populations. How many of you guys in here have a dog? If you take all your dogs, and they might be weird, you do a church dog show and you got the little greebly ones and the great big ones and all sorts of different ones. They all come from wolves. But that's not evolution. That's just looking for the traits and the kinds that are already there and breeding for them, right? I mean, it's very interesting because, if Science Magazine has an article that you can quickly make into a popular level article, you'll often see it show up in National Geographic. You know that great faith-building magazine, National Geographic? Yeah, that was sarcasm. Anyway, they called their article in National Geographic, From Wolf to Woof. Right? From wolf to woof, but they called it the evolution of dogs. Wait a sec. If you went from that to that, are you evolving? You're devolving, right? Because this thing here is a genetic little mutant. I'm not even being mean. That's a scientific term for this thing. Look at it. I mean, if you drop these two things off in northern, Ontario, which one do you think would survive? Which do you think has more genetic information in it? I mean, this guy here, he can't even lift his ears anymore, right? Little Fluffy, it's like, you can't, it doesn't work. The wolf is like, it's like radar, right? A little Fluffy there, you got to get the Roto-Rooter in there, feed him some heart pills, try to keep him alive. The wolf seems to be pretty hardy, isn't it? They actually said this in the article. Genetic studies show that dogs evolved, see, they just used the word again. They evolved from wolves, but they remain as similar to the creatures from which they came as humans with different physical characteristics are to each other, which is to say not much difference at all. Well, wait a sec. I mean, if we take someone from Asia, we take someone from Africa, we take someone from Europe, we're all humans, right? Yeah. So that means they're all dogs, right? Yeah. What does the Bible say? God created kinds of creatures to reproduce after their own kind. See, if you want to believe that any kind of creature has ever turned into anything else, you believe it on faith because you've never observed it. How many people here have observed puppies being born? Okay, so Pastor, was there more than one puppy? Okay, so you watched her give birth? Okay, so when you were sitting there watching, were you sitting there going, man, I wonder what's going to come out? That's kind of a ridiculous statement, isn't it? And I'm not trying to misrepresent what an evolutionist would say, because they would say, no, these changes happen so slowly that, it wouldn't be one big, yeah, whatever. What's the difference between something you've never seen and something that just doesn't happen? If you want to believe in evolution, you believe it on faith because you've never seen anything but creatures reproducing after their own kind. Now, this is what we see, okay? But you must watch out for certain arguments that you're going to hear. For example, how many people have heard this argument? Yeah, but wait a sec. What about mosquitoes that evolve resistance to DDT? How many people have heard that argument for evolution? Yeah, I see some people here. Okay, so here's the argument. They say, listen, we walk into a swamp, we spray our DDT. We kill the mosquitoes. But we come back next year, and there's all these new mosquitoes, and we spray our DDT, and they've evolved resistance. They must have some new stuff that they didn't have before. Otherwise, how could they resist the poison? Well, see, I've been using this hand sanitizer stuff for a while now. When I first came on board with the ministry, I'm traveling all over Canada, right? So I'm in BC, I'm in Newfoundland, I'm back in Ontario, and hey, thank you for coming to the meeting. Thank you for coming to the meeting. I wipe my nose, I get in a cold, right? So I started using this hand sanitizer stuff. Now, ever notice what it says on the bottle? I hated that. Kills 99.9% of germs. I'm in Shoppers Drug Mart. I'm sitting there going, man, which one kills them all? Because I'm going to be the guy, right? Oh, thank you for coming to the meeting, sir. 0.01%. I wipe my nose. I got another cold. But the problem is you can't find one. And it gives you an insight into this argument that we're talking about here. See, you walk into the swamp, you spray your DDT, you kill about 99.9% of the mosquitoes. Or you kill a portion of them anyway. But some of them survive your DDT. They survive the DDT because they already have resistance to the poison. You know how we know that? Because they don't die. It's pretty scientific. No, you can actually go into, scientists will go in and say, yeah, this bit of genetic information here is actually causing resistance to this poison. And see what happens, you walk into the swamp, you spray your DDT, you kill about 99.9% of them, but the population that already has resistance to your poison, they reproduce after their own kind. And they pass on that genetic information, and all of a sudden you've got an army of mosquitoes with that genetic information, and now you spray your DDT and you don't kill any of them, and now you got to get a new poison to kill them. Now see, the evolutionist is saying, yeah, but they evolved resistance. And the creationist is saying, excuse me, if they already had the genetic information in the population, that's not evolution. So just watch out for the arguments, because they can get a little tricky sometimes. But if you ask an informed biologist today, or any biologist actually, and just ask them this question: can natural selection create new genetic information? They're going to say, no, they can't. Because it's a selection process. If I go to a library and I select books out of the library of information, that doesn't cause new books to write themselves and jump into the library. Okay? But evolutionists still believe in evolution, right? So what do they believe is writing the new information? Mutations. Now, if you don't know what a mutation is, basically DNA is constantly making copies of itself as your cells replicate, right? So DNA is making a copy of. Now, you know, there's a lot of letters in human DNA, but anyway, letters of information, but there's only actually four chemical letters in the code system. And these four chemical letters, you line them up in three-letter codons or words, and those words spell out the genetic information for whatever creature you're talking about. Now, as the DNA is making copies of itself, sometimes there are spelling errors that occur when it's making a copy of itself. Give you an example. Let's say I take a really simple book, like Little Red Riding Hood, okay? And it's not a lot of information. I hand it to the first gal there. So could you make me a copy from that? So you're going to look at my copy, and you're going to copy, and you're going to make a copy. Then you're going to make a copy from her copy. You're going to make a copy from her copy, and everybody's going to copy off the last person's copy. What's going to happen? We live in a sin-cursed world. You guys are probably pretty sharp, but sooner or later somebody's going to make a mistake, right? Somebody's going to put in the wrong letter. They're going to misspell a word. They're going to maybe invert the word. They're maybe going to double up a whole paragraph of information they've already done. I mean, all these analogies to real type mutations that we see in the genetic code, right? Here's what the evolutionist is now saying. If you make enough spelling mistakes, because that's what a mutation is, if you make enough genetic copying mistakes, spelling mistakes, if we start off with Little Red Riding Hood here, and we copy it enough times and make enough mistakes, by the time it gets over to here, it turns into the works of Shakespeare. That's a little counterintuitive, isn't it? Can you really do that? Can you make enough spelling errors to write reams of useful coded information? Well, let's take a look at some of the mutations we see on this planet. If you don't like snakes, avert your eyes. There you go. There's a mutation. Some people say, well, look, two heads are better than one. See, some people say, well, look, there's more genetic information there. It's got two heads. Wait a sec. If I hand you 2 copies of today's newspaper, do you have more information? No, I could hand you 30 copies of today's newspaper. You don't have more information. Statistically, you might, but you don't have more useful information. You can do that with pineapples, too. You know, you actually have programmed cell death in between your digits when you're in your mom's womb. That's how you get your digits. You can see here that this person, there was a mutation, a glitch in the system here. And not only do they have 6 fingers, but 4 of them are fused together. It's a mutation, a defect. How many people here remember thalidomide? The drug thalidomide? Some people, yeah. I mean, thalidomide was used in the 50s, I think, to prevent nausea for moms who had, you get morning sickness and stuff, but it hadn't been tested properly. And so if you ever see a program on the thalidomide kids, many of them had mutations, birth defects. And, you'd see the kid and they wouldn't have an arm. They'd just have a little flipper there or something like that. It was pretty tragic. And actually, I looked up what was going on with the thalidomide kids a couple of years ago, and many of them have grown up, had their own families, and they've passed on those defects to their kids. Once it gets locked in the system, you can't get rid of it, right? And, those types of mutations are like deletions. For example, let's say you're writing out an email, and you go, oh, I don't like that sentence, and you highlight it, and you hit delete. The information's gone, right? Same thing with the arm. It's gone, or it doesn't get expressed. Here's a creature like that. See, this creature used to have information for melanin, for skin color, but it's been deleted from its program. What do you call that? What's that? He doesn't know? That's a hexapus. It's not an octopus, because you see, this is Harry the hexapus. He's over in the aquarium in Europe somewhere. And you notice that Harry didn't have 2 of his arms bitten off by a shark or anything. They haven't expressed themselves. Deletions, right? Mutations. How many fishermen here? Come on. We got some fishermen. You guys are going to love this mutation. Okay? Twice as many chances to catch this guy. That's pretty cool. But see, the lower jaw isn't even hardwired into the central nervous system. It's a glitch. It's a mutation. It's a defect is what it is. In an effort to observe evolution, scientists take lab animals and they do mean things to them. They zap them with radiation because they know that the radiation will mutate the DNA, right? So what do we see? Well, we get the little mouse here and he gets balls of cancer and his hair falls out. You know, cancer's a mutation. Did you know pretty well every health food regime on the planet right now is trying to prevent you from getting mutations? You know why? Because you know why you get old and die? Is because all those cells in your body don't replicate perfectly. And as they keep making copies, they degenerate, and that's why you get saggy and wrinkly, and finally you die. That's why you die, is because of mutations. What about fruit flies? We zap them with radiation because nobody cares about fruit flies, right? They don't have big doughy eyes like seals or anything like that, so these, you know. And they take these fruit flies and they zap them with radiation. What do we see? Well, some of them don't have wings. Some of them have crumpled wings. Some of them have their legs growing out of their eyes. But you know, we've never seen a fruit fly turn into a butterfly. It just messes up the DNA that's already there. So, you know what's interesting is that evolutionists don't have one rock-solid case where they can... I mean, even in all of the random replication with all of the creatures on this planet that are constant... I mean, bacteria makes a copy of itself, some of them every 20 minutes, right? In the millions and billions of mutations that we've observed on the planet, an evolutionist doesn't even have one case where random mutations can cause new information. But let's say they did. Let's say they even found one. They haven't yet. Even if they did, in order for evolution to be true, that would have needed to occur billions and billions of times. But that's not what we observe, folks. So why do most people believe it? Well, it gets taught as fact in public school. I mean, all the information I just shared with you is available, right? See, a lot of times it's equivocation. Little Johnny's in school and the teacher's talking about, oh yeah, I see evolution happening, but he's just talking about the changes in the variations within the created kinds. But little Johnny's thinking, oh yeah, we went from pond scum to people. Let me tell you what I think it is. I call it smart guy syndrome. See, I cut my teeth on this area of apologetics when my senior pastor at my home church in Guelph, Ontario, asked me to do an on-site Bible study at the University of Guelph. And for 5 years I did that. And Angela would come down, and we had a lot of students at that Bible study. And of course, you'd see new first-year students come. Oh, you guys are doing a Bible study? We'd be like, yeah, come on in. You know, we'd see new people come in and stuff. And of course, I was the facilitator of this small group, so I'm greeting them and stuff. And hey, how you doing? And where are you from? And all this kind of stuff. And, you know, I always warn them, especially first-year students. So this is your first year. You got to understand, this university really isn't a Christian-friendly environment. And they'd go, oh, it's no problem. You know, when I was going away, my mommy and daddy sat me down and they gave me this really serious talk, you know, and you know, I talked to my pastor and he said, oh, you got to get connected to a local church right away. And, oh, it's going to be fine. Don't worry about it. And then you'd bump into them 6 months later. Hey, how you doing? Fine. Well, I haven't seen you down at Bible study. Yeah, well, I'm not really interested in religion anymore. Thank you. Six months. No apologetic defense for their faith. It was the equivalent of their prof intellectually jamming them up against the wall and smashing them, saying, if you believe the Bible, you're an idiot. And I'm not using that word lightly because they use it. Just not with the Muslims. That's what I noticed. But if you're a Christian, it's open season. So if you're going to go to university, you're going to go out there, you better put your flak jacket on because you're going to take a lot of damage if you aren't prepared. And I saw it happen over and over and over again, guys. And some of these kids were getting, oh yeah, I used to be the leader. You know, at my public school, we were doing prayer time at our flagpole, you know, every morning in our CIA Christian in Action group. But they didn't last 6 months against the evolutionary barrage, the secularist, naturalistic attack that was just boom. Unbelievable. I mean, smart guy syndrome. You know, you talk to them, you'd say, but listen, man, you told me you grew up in the church your whole life. Yeah, I did. My parents just aren't educated, though. They didn't know. They just believed the Bible because their mommy and daddy told them to believe the Bible. Huh. Well, don't you think the church ever did you any good? Well, maybe. My youth pastor was a cool guy. He got me through some tough times. But, my professor, he's got a lot of little letters at the end of his name. He's really smart. And I'm going with him. Smart guy syndrome. How about Richard Dawkins, most famous atheist on the planet? He's a smart guy? Absolutely. Educated at Oxford, taught zoology at the University of California in Oxford, formerly the Charles Simonyi Professor of Public Understanding of Science at Oxford, prolific writer, brilliant guy, has nothing to do whether he's smart or not. It has everything to do with the fact that he's an atheist, so he interprets all the information according to his belief system. He said all sorts of things over the years, Dawkins. He said things like this. It's absolutely safe to say that if you meet somebody who claims not to believe in evolution, that person is ignorant, stupid, or insane. This is the way it's doled out at the university level. Faith is a great cop-out, the great excuse to evade the need to think and evaluate evidence. Well, we've been evaluating evidence. I don't mind doing that. He said if people think God is interesting, the onus is on them to show that there's anything there to talk about. Otherwise, they should just shut up about it. See how strong he is in his atheistic faith? Well, I shared this quote with you this morning, but for those of you who weren't here, Richard Dawkins, the foremost champion of evolution on the planet, was on Bill Moyer's show Now in 2004, and Moyers asked him an interesting question. He said, Richard, is evolution a theory, not a fact? And Dawkins' reply was, evolution has been observed, it's just that it hasn't been observed while it's happening. Which means evolution hasn't been observed, which means it's not empirical science. And as I mentioned, this quote has caused Dawkins a lot of damage, of course, and he's trying to, shore up his argument in years to come. And here is another quote that he said after this one. He said this. This is an atheist speaking, by the way. Dawkins, the refusal to believe in anything you can't see yourself is absurd. Think about it. I never saw Napoleon with my own eyes, but that doesn't mean Napoleon didn't exist. Now that's from an atheist. You know what he's saying? Well, just because you can't see evolution doesn't mean it's not real. You guys ever heard an argument like that before? Well, I don't see God. This is not a science versus faith issue. This is a faith versus faith issue based on the same facts, folks. So why do people believe it? Because it gets taught as fact in schools. And people just get inundated with it. They get crushed with it. For example, the fossil record. They're talking about the fossil record. Well, you see, when we look into rocks, we think this one turned into this one, and we think this one turned into this one, right? It's interesting to study the evolutionary literature. You can often see a lot of holes in their arguments. For example, National Geographic again, 2004. The title article was Darwin Wrong? You opened up the book, and of course it said, no, he was right. They were talking about the fossil record, and this is what they said. Illuminating, but spotty. The fossil record is like a film of evolution, from which 999 out of 1,000 frames have been lost. How would you guys like to watch a film from which 999 out of 1,000 frames weren't there? You wouldn't see much, would you? Done. Right? It'd be all over. How would you like to go to court and prove your case on 0.01% of the evidence? You'd fail. Except you don't get to do that in public school because they only teach it one way. See, Romans 1:20 says, for the invisible things of him from the creation of the world are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made, even his eternal power and Godhead, so that they are without excuse. You know what, folks? If you ever meet somebody who tells you they're an atheist, they're lying to you. This verse here confirms the fact that everyone on the planet knows there's a God. You know how they know there's a God? Because of what he created. And they're suppressing that truth in their unrighteousness is what they're doing. And if they say, no, I'm an atheist, and you can say, no, you're not. No, I am. Do you think I'm lying? Yeah. Because God's word says you're a liar. And he is not a man that he should lie. There are no such thing as true atheists. They're professing atheists is what they are. And they know there's a God because of what he made, the creation. See, somebody was asking me earlier today, do we ever get into schools, public schools? Well, actually, I've only been in 2 public schools since I started with this ministry in 5 years. One was in Wallaceburg, fairly close to here, right? And I got into the grade 11 and 12 philosophy class. And the teacher wasn't a Christian. He was a lapsed Catholic atheist evolutionist now. But he was open-minded, and he wanted to have, us come in. And I remember walking in there, and I'm setting up my equipment and stuff. And most of the students weren't Christians, but most of them were polite. But this one guy comes right in front of where I'm standing. He's like, oh, it's prayer time today. One of these guys. I'm like, whatever. I set up. I said, I'm a Christian. I believe the Bible's the Word of God. I'm here to talk to you about creation. I start talking, and I said, by the way, if anybody has a question, just put up their hand. And so I'm into about 3 minutes into my presentation. Right? Hand shoots up. I'm like, yes. He's like, what about carbon dating? I was like, ooh, never had that one before. So I answered his question. A couple minutes later, what about dinosaurs? The typical questions I get asked when I go around. So I answer his questions about 5 times. Now all of a sudden he's like huffing and puffing and steam going out of his ears. And so I just kind of stopped and I said, hey man, relax. This is no big deal, right? I mean, I believe one thing, you believe another thing. As a matter of fact, I know where you're coming from because I used to be you, right? And I said, well, I said, as a matter of fact, this is philosophy class, so it's really not that important. Anyway, the teacher didn't like that. I said to him, listen, maybe you have a wrong understanding of how Christians come to know what they believe. I said, do you think Christians, we just come to this big room every now and then, and someone comes up to the front and they open up this big book and they start teaching out of the book and everybody just believes what they say? And he was like, yeah. And I was like, that's interesting, because that sounds like your science class. Because that's exactly how I grew up, folks. I didn't go to church. But I went to school, and they'd ring this little bell, ding-a-ding-a-ding, and I'd go running off to this big room, and someone would come up to the front, and they'd open up this big book, and they started teaching it to me as fact, and I bought it. Evolution as fact. See, I wasn't doing that just to zing him. I was doing that because there were a couple of Christian kids in that class that weren't standing up for their faith for nothing. You have to know why you believe what you believe, not just because your mom and dad are Christians, but because you truly, truly know you're standing on the rock. See, people come to believe this stuff, not because it's not obvious that there's a God, but they get inundated with this information, always interpreted one way. For example, how many people have seen a diagram like this used to convince you of evolution? Lots of hands again. Okay, this is the argument from homology. This is similarity. This is the way it goes down in the classroom. Okay, kiddies, we're going to teach you about evolution. See the creatures here? Look at the whale. 1 bone here, 2 bones here, 5 digits here. Look at this. 1 bone here, 2 bones here, 5 digits here. Isn't it obvious that we evolved from a common ancestor? Well, let me show you a couple of different diagrams. How many people think that the unicycle evolved into the Porsche? People say, Cal, that's a ridiculous analogy. I say, okay, well, what's the problem with it? I say, Cal, listen, I mean, these things are manufactured. It's obvious that an intelligent designer would use similar component parts in a variety of different applications. Yeah, it's a good argument for that. Isn't it obvious that an intelligent designer would use similar component parts in a variety of different applications? Why is it always touted as evolution, folks? See, there's different ways of explaining the same data, right? By the way, you remember my friend I was talking to you about? His hand shot up again. I was like, oh. He's like, that's not fair. I was like, okay, cool. What's not fair about it? He was like, He didn't know. He was just all pumped up at that time. So I said, okay, well, I said, let me help you out here. Are you saying that these things, these are manufactured, right? We see them being created. They're actually simpler than these things, because these things, they make themselves, right? He said, yeah. He didn't really know. But anyway, I said, okay, well, you're right. These things are more complicated than these things, and we see these manufactured, but these actually replicate. But isn't it true that the more complicated something is, the less chance it happened by chance? Let me run that by you again. Isn't it true that the more complicated something is, the less chance it happened by chance? I'll give you an analogy. Let's say you're on a boat. Boat's going along, boat sinks. You're swimming. You get to an island. You don't know whether it's deserted or not. So you're looking for signs of intelligence, right? So you walk down the beach and you look down and you see an arrowhead. What do you know? Somebody's been here. Someone smart's either here or they have been here, because rocks don't make themselves into arrowheads, do they? Well, wait a sec. Maybe you're skeptical like my friend, right? Maybe you look up and you see a cliff and you're like, wait a sec. Maybe the wind blew and a rock fell, and every time it fell, it went chip, 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 woof, and it looks like an arrowhead, but it's not. Because you don't want to get sucked into these intelligent design arguments. Come on. You're too smart for that. So you keep going on the beach, because that's not good enough evidence for you. And you look down and you see a little metal dinky toy. Gigs up, right? That's way too complicated. How do you make a dinky toy? You got to pull rocks out of the ground. You got to melt it all down. You got to get the metals. You got to get a mold. It's way too complicated. Somebody created that thing, right? So you're excited now. So you head off down the beach. You look down. There's a cell phone. Yes, I'm going to get out of here, right? That thing's really complicated. Turn the corner a little bit more and there's a laptop computer. You're like, oh man. Turn the corner and there's a space shuttle and you're like, wow. Because whoever put that thing together is really smart, right? But if you just happened to look down on the beach just then and you saw a little worm wiggling by, did you know any biologist on the planet would tell you that worm is so far more complicated than anything I've just described, they can't even believe it, folks. Do you know what's going on inside one cell inside that worm? It's so complicated, they are now describing it like all the activity going on inside of a city like London or New York. I'm not talking about London, I'm talking about London, England. In a day. One cell. All the construction, all the destruction, all the movement of parcels, all the communication. One cell in that worm blows anything we've ever done right off the map. And you know what's really cool about worms? Well, they wiggle along, they eat dirt, whoop, they make more worms. You take a worm, you chop it in half, you got 2 worms. It's pretty cool. You don't think that's cool? Come on, guys, listen. Don't you think that NASA would like to make like a mommy space shuttle and a daddy space shuttle and give them some alone time in the hangar, whoop, 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 whoop. They'd have all sorts of space shuttles. I'm sure they'd love that program. But they can't do it. You know why? Because they don't have the technology. Only God has ever created anything that can make a copy of itself. There was a German scientist named van Neumann who tried to make a machine to make itself. It's impossible. As far as our technology goes. Well, God can. Romans 1:20 says you can know there's a God because of what he created. I don't know how many people here have ever seen a bee orchid before. What you're looking at right now on the screen is a plant. It's an orchid. And these plants have a very interesting way of pollinating and making copies of themselves. Now, it's obvious why they called the bee orchid a bee orchid, because it looks like a bee, right? There's a real bee and there's a bee orchid. And you can see it's got the shape and the coloration of a bee. But not only the shape and the coloration, it also is fuzzy like a bee. You know how bees are kind of fuzzy? Well, this plant is fuzzy like a bee. But not only does it have the shape and the coloration and the fuzziness of a bee, it also smells like a female bee in heat every now and then. It produces a pheromone which smells like a female bee in heat. So if you study the cross-section of a bee orchid, it's a very interesting creature. Creation, I guess we say, plant. This thing here, this is the labellum. Okay, that's the part that looks and smells and feels like a female bee. And we got kids here tonight, so we're going to keep it PG. We're just going to say that these plants have both male and female parts. Good? Okay. This part's the female part. This part here, the pollinium, this is the shaft here with the seed in it, right? So how do these plants, pollinate and stuff? Well, Mr. B's flying along one day, and beautiful perfume, looks down, sees what he thinks is a female bee, and he lands. Now, when he lands, that shaft there, it's got some glue on it, and because of how he lands, it goes and it sticks to his head. And he backs off, and he's like, whoa, what's that? Now he's flying around, he's got this thing stuck on his head, right? And he's like, man, what's her problem? But this thing has this mechanism in it, so as soon as it pops off and sticks to his head, it bends down at a 90-degree angle. So now he's flying along with this bent thing on his head. He's like, what's going on? But guys, one-track mind, right? Perfume, whoa, And he finds another plant, and when he lands, because this thing is perfectly shaped, it now inserts itself, and you get more bee orchids. Evolve that. I've never had an evolutionist be able to explain that. Because it just doesn't make sense how a plant with no eyes can know to shape itself like a bee. And it's got no eyes, so it certainly doesn't know how to make itself colored like a bee. And it doesn't have tactile sensory input like we do. It doesn't know how to, I'm going to make myself feel like a fuzzy bee. And it doesn't have a nose, and it doesn't have a brain, but somehow it's going to make the biochemicals to make it smell like a female bee in heat. A chemist would have a real tough time doing that. And this is something that supposedly has no brain. You can know there's a God because of what he created. But that's not enough for salvation. Only faith in Jesus Christ can save you from the wrath of God. Because the fact is, there is a God. Everyone knows there is a God. And everyone knows there's a moral law. And they haven't fulfilled it. And when you die, you're going to stand in front of God's courtroom. You're going to be in God's courtroom. And you're either going to justify yourself and tell God why you're so good that you should be with him in eternity. Or you're going to have a representative in Jesus Christ. Someone to represent you. Those are your only options. Why is this even important? There are many people that you will run across, many Christians, this isn't an important issue. We don't care. Maybe God used evolution. Doesn't matter. Millions of years, doesn't matter. None of this stuff matters. They're missing the point, right? See, many people have been taught that evolution, that's just a scientific theory. It doesn't have any bearing on morality or our society or ethics or anything like that. But what's interesting is that the most prominent evolutionist on the planet says, yes, it does. Richard Dawkins has said this: I'm a passionate Darwinian when it comes to science, when it comes to explaining the world, but I'm a passionate anti-Darwinian when it comes to morality and politics. So guess what? In his mind, because he's a well-educated person, he knows that there's a connection between morality and politics and evolution. Can we think of any world leaders within the last 100 years that used social Darwinism to shape their countries? Stalin, Lenin, Mayo, Pol Pot, Hitler. I don't know if you've read Mein Kampf. I've read large portions of it, but he was a fanatical Darwinist. And the idea was, there was a superior Aryan race. And then there was a subhuman Jewish race. And what we're going to do is we're going to apply natural selection to the population, and we're going to wipe them out. And if you've got more melanin in your skin than we do, then you're subhuman and we wipe you out too. Natural selection applied to a population. That's exactly what Dawkins is talking about here, because he's a well-educated person. But, of course, he's also said this: we live in a universe which has no design, no purpose, no evil, no good, nothing but blind, pitiless indifference. And if that's true, then who cares? You got kids starving in Africa? Who cares? They die, that's better for us. You know why? Because there's more resources for us. Survival of the fittest. Do you notice that mentality starting to creep into your society all over the place? As the concept of eugenics gets promoted, abortion is widespread. You know, abortion, that's just so common now. There was a medical journal this year that published an article. It's the Journal of Medical Ethics. And one of their articles was called After Birth Abortion, Why Should the Child Live? And in that Journal of Medical Ethics, they argued that parents should be able to kill their kids at any time they want after they're born, or that they're advocating a certain time period. But where does that stop then? They say that you should be able to abort a child after it's born, as in kill them after they're born, for any reason that you would abort a child in the womb. Well, yeah, but they've already said that you can abort a child in the womb for any reason, which means, are we going to come to a society where kids are born and you just decide to get rid of them? Of course this has an impact on how people think. I mean, I don't know how many of you have ever heard of Ravi Zacharias. Yeah, brilliant Christian apologist. And Ravi was actually at Oxford University years ago, and he's talking about the existence of God, and many of Dawkins' cronies, because Dawkins is from Oxford, showed up in the Q&A time to argue with him, and they're thinking the same thing that Dawkins teaches. No evil, no good, right? And of course that makes sense in an atheistic worldview, because see, if you ever say to somebody, what you did was wrong, you know what you're actually saying? You're telling them that there's a moral law that you know, and that they know, and that they've broken it. But if there's no, where do moral laws come from? Moral lawgivers, right? Yeah, but if there's no moral lawgiver, ultimate moral lawgiver, then it's just people who make laws. But if I think one thing and you think another thing, then you've got chaos, right? I mean, this is exactly how the war criminals in World War II argued, right? At the Nuremberg trials, they said, wait a sec, you can't punish us for what we did, because in our country at this time it was legal to do so. And they said, no, there is a higher law. What was that higher law? God's law. You take away God, you don't have an absolute morality anymore. And so these guys show up to see Ravi speak in the Q&A, and they start arguing with him. There's no such thing as right and wrong. There's no such thing as good and evil. You can't quote the 10 Commandments. So if you know Ravi, he's a pretty brilliant guy, and he's very disarming. I kind of think of him like as Columbo, if you remember that old detective, you know. Anyway, and he said, okay, well, I just need to understand your position. He said, so you don't think there's an absolute right or an absolute wrong? Right. Some of you's got it anyway. It's a problem with being an atheist, because you can't argue. Because if there's no right and wrong, then why are you even there to argue, right? And he said, okay. He took the argument to the extreme. He said, well, if I just took a newborn baby, you know, just took it up here and started hacking it to bits, would that be right or wrong? You know what the leader of the atheists said? Well, it wouldn't be wrong, but I wouldn't like it. Do you realize the implications of a society with a bunch of people that think like that? You can justify anything, folks. Anything you want. As soon as you get rid of God, you get rid of the lawgiver, man gets to decide what's right and wrong. And then you got hell on earth. So it's an important topic. If you're interested in a product, a resource that talks about what I explained here tonight, I don't have a DVD on this topic, but Dr. Carl Wieland has an excellent DVD. It's called Dynamic Life, Changes in Living Things. And it's a fantastic DVD, and Carl's a very learned man. He's actually the creator of Creation Magazine. And he does a far better job than showing what I did tonight. You know, why the changes in living things aren't really evolution, etc. And so if you want that DVD, you can do that. And, you know, as a matter of fact, I want to give this as a gift to someone in the audience here tonight, because it was really cool. I was sitting there, and you were about to do your song, and the hymn book in front of me, one of the little ones took it. And I noticed one of your young people, she noticed that I didn't have a hymn book anymore. And so she scooted down and she got one, and she just kind of put it there for me. She wasn't even looking for recognition, but I noticed that she did such a nice thing for her guest speaker that I'm going to give her this DVD. Thank you so much for doing that for me. She didn't think she was going to get a reward for doing that. That's why I wanted to give her one, because I thought it was such a nice gesture. Anyway, that's a great DVD if you're trying to explain what I explained tonight, or you want to hand that to someone. This book, Refuting Evolution by Jonathan Sarfati, was created because there was a curriculum given to teachers in the U.S. about how to teach kids evolution. And so one of our scientists, Jonathan Sarfati, wrote this book refuting all their points. So it's a great primer to give to young people, okay, on how to defend their faith here. And also, just wanted to mention one more time our Creation magazine. Some of you had an opportunity to sign up this morning, but maybe you didn't have an opportunity, or maybe there's new people here that would like to have that opportunity. Now, this is our #1 equipping tool, folks, for helping Christian families understand this. Because, see, it comes into your house on a regular basis, right? And so all the latest and greatest, arguments that evolutionists are coming out with, our staff looks at them, rebuts them, shows you good arguments against them, shows you good ways to teach your kids, how to think in these areas. And then you've got a witnessing tool. It's a really good thing, because then, you're talking to your friend and he says, oh yeah, but evolution's a fact. You can just hand it to him. Say, hey, why don't you check this out, right? This magazine disappears from dentist's office and your doctor's office. It'll disappear fast because people take it home. But great, then the gospel's being shared. So if you want to take advantage of that, what we're doing here tonight is, if you sign up for 1 year, you get a free DVD. If you sign up for 3 years, it's $78. You get 2 free DVDs. So it's a really good deal. If you haven't had a chance yet, you can do that later on. But we're just going to pass the clipboards now, because we got a small foyer out there. So I think our guys are getting geared up. And what's going to happen is these clipboards will come around. They look like this. You just put your information here, and there's a little perforated tag. See that little line? You just rip that off, bring it to the back, and we'll get you signed up. So we'll do that. And don't forget our Creation Magazine Live. I'm trying to signal them here. See if my lightsaber will do it. There we go. Creation Magazine Live is a 1-hour television program that you can access through the Miracle Channel, or just right off our website. And it's myself and Richard Fangrad, our CEO. And we do kind of what we're doing tonight. We take a topic and we discuss it, and we show what the Bible says about the topic, and we show what science is showing, and just to show Christians that there is no reason for them not to trust the Bible. That science is not disproving the Bible. Science fits perfectly. What we see in God's world matches what God's word says. That's the whole point of the show. So you can tune into that absolutely free.